All right, all right. How's everybody doing? Hope everybody's well. Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist News for the day. I told y'all last week I had some thoughts on Galloway, so I figured we'd get into it a little bit, but I hope everybody's good. Shout out to everybody who came through a little bit early. Appreciate that. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel so we can continue to bring you this independent black male thought. Y'all know what it is. Best ways to support are right there on the screen. So you can do so by donating to Patreon, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. Y'all know the deal. You can become a member of the YouTube channel or become a member of the Patreon. And, if you become a patron, especially if you sign up for the film reviews, you get to enjoy live film reviews with me and the gang, chopping it up on key films that hopefully you guys will enjoy. So let me see the next ones. We do the 1st and the 15th. So I think, December 1st, we're probably going to get into Tron Ares because there's some stuff relevant to us in there. The Gynocracy is in effect in that movie, so we're going to be talking about that. And then on 15th, I think we're looking at Strictly Business. So we're going to take it back to Tommy Davidson back in the day. So hopefully you'll join us for those two. Tron Ares on the 1st, Strictly Business on the 15th of December. So check us out. All right. But for those who came through, let me see. Adric Reynolds, shout out to Inner Light. We are going to be broadcasting on Inner Light Radio. I believe we are now. Black-owned online radio station, so check it out. Innerlightradio.com. Shout out to Malika. I got your text. Appreciate that. St. Cyr, what's up? No Fear, what's going on? We got Rude Boy, Jaguar Archery, what's happening? Yamaron. Hope I'm not butchering that. Accidental, what's up? Let's see. No News, Jeff Yu, Giovanni. Grabbed to second gear. Got Marcos. Discipline, what's happening, Discipline? Let me see. A wrench, yeah. I need to be doing a few more of those. There you go. All right, so Discipline, you should have a wrench now. So my apologies. I have not really been up on that. So I really need to do some catching up on that. On the clock, what's happening? Mark, what's going on? LXST, shout out to you. Let me see. All for One. Sam Shavers, what's up? Michael. TCW, Pistol Pete. Okay, Pistol Pete, I gotta look for it. Let's see. Ahmed Global. One of the things that gets me is, you guys have online names and then you have, your government names. And then sometimes y'all have a different name on Twitter or Facebook, and it's real hard for me to keep up sometimes. Ahmed, what's going on? Indigo, what's happening? The great Pretender, what's up? B Hunter. I appreciate that support. Black Males, GRP, what's going on? Let's see. It's a pistol asked for one too. All right. And then we got Indigo, Spoken Soul. Yep. And Mr. Sandman, appreciate that support. What's the good news? Oh man. Well, I do have some good news. So I'm actually, hold on. B Hunter, appreciate that. All right. Yeah. Yeah, man. My son is coming home tomorrow from the break. So man, I'm all kinds of lit, man. I ain't seen him in a few months. So looking forward to that. Said he wants to cook with the old man, learn some of the family recipes and whatnot. So looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm hyped, man. Yeah. Ain't seen him in a minute, so real interested to see what he's learning. We talk a little bit. He tells me about the things they're learning in class. He's finally at the point where he's actually doing the classwork he wants to do. He's passed the GE stuff, and he's in STEM biology, so he's finally getting to enjoy it. So he texts me or calls me excited. Sometimes he'll send me videos, so I'm looking forward to talking to him about what he's into. So yeah, man, I'm excited about that. Actually, it's a twofer. I'm excited because my son is coming home. I'm also excited because yesterday, I told you guys I sit on a lot of different dissertation committees for brothers who are interested in doing Black male studies, and sometimes they find resistance on their campuses. Sometimes they just find a lack of support altogether. So I'm on several different committees, and so one of my brothers, I've been actually working with him since undergrad. He's one of 3 of my undergrads that went on to graduate school and completed their doctorate. So 2 of them have completed. I got 1 more that's just getting started. But this brother just yesterday completed his doctorate at Rutgers, and so I sat on his committee while he defended his dissertation, and so I'm lit because he did extremely well, did an excellent job. So that's 2 PhDs that I have mentored and taught since undergrad. And it's a beautiful thing when you see young brothers, get up and do their thing. So I'm excited on a couple of levels, and happy that I'm able to even witness it. Shout out to Sam Shavers, appreciate that. But yeah, man. So I'm in a good space, definitely in a good space. So I've had the music blasting all day, and I said, well, let me get on and say a few words about a couple things. So, hopefully I can stay on track because I'm a little bit lit. So anyway, yeah. So shout out to y'all. Hope everybody's well. We're going to get into it a little bit. So I talked about last week, feminization. And I talked a little bit about that on Jeff St. James's channel. Shout out to Jeff. Appreciate that. Actually, I also saw Layman's Journal in the chat. Y'all make sure you support the Layman's Journal channel since he got it back. So YouTube took it down, brought it back. So, if you're not subscribed, make sure you are. And keep up with the brother and what he's doing. But yeah, was on Ask a Brother podcast. Had a chance to speak with Jeff, St. James. That was good. We had a good talk. It was a good moment. Dig his work. So shout out to the brother, support him as well. But last week I mentioned that I was going to come back and talk a little bit about Scott Galloway and some of the work he's doing and get into it. But I saw some things I wanted to kind of connect a little bit with Brian McKnight. You guys are familiar. I've been listening to Brian McKnight since the early 90s as an R&B singer. The brother's been going through a lot of drama with the family. He's been hated, most particularly amongst Black women, for years now. And he finally, came back twofold. He took his wife to court for defamation and won. And then he decided to get on with Anton and tell his story, and tell his side of the account. And there's a lot of people with egg on their face. There's some people that are just going to hate him just because it is what it is. But shout out to him for, speaking up, telling the other side of the story, and breaking it down. Appreciate Malika for the donation. Appreciate that. Shout out to Spoken Soul. Let's see. Yeah, appreciate that. Let's see. So Tandy asks who I am. Okay, I'm a professor of Africana Studies at Fresno State, and I have had this channel going 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. And so I'm an advocate for Black men, straight up. So it is what it is. Anyway, yeah. So anyway, so let's start with Scott. So I'm going to watch, there's about a 17, 18 minute interview. He's done a few lately. He's released a new book. He's talking about a few things. Just to be clear, I don't hate Scott. I don't hate his boy, Richard Reeves. I disagree with certain things. I put them in a certain context in terms of the work that they're doing. I disagree on strategy, but anybody that's trying to uplift men and boys, I'm going to have a certain amount of respect for on some level, because it's not like it's a lot of us, as far as publicly advocating for men and boys. I mean, men and boys have been villainized and for so long now that, I tip my hat to anybody that's willing to step in the fire and advocate, and at least attempt to humanize, men and boys, as far as that's concerned. But I have some disagreements. So anyway, we'll get into that, and then we'll jump into a little Brian McKnight as we go. So let me get this up here. All right, let me pull that down, put that up. There we go. So this is Scott Galloway, sounds the alarm on the crisis facing young men. Amanpour and company. We'll get into a little bit of what they're talking about here. Shout out to Black Nerd. I see you in there. What's up? He said, he's going live. It's like the bat signal. Saw the notification on my phone. Yeah, I'm surprised they shot it out, man. My notifications, when I do them, haven't necessarily been going out. So I'm glad to see that they're working. So we got 200 in the building. Please make sure you like the show. I would appreciate that. Let's get started here. Let me turn this down more. All right. So let's check out what Scott has to say. And remember, he's shopping his new book. So that's what a lot of this is. He's got a lot of stats, most of which really targeted around white males, but it is what it is. I didn't expect anything different, really. But here we go.
Experiencing a crisis of masculinity. Our next guest argues that a host of cultural and economic issues have promoted unhealthy perceptions of masculinity, resulting in toxic behaviors and relationships. NYU professor and podcast host Scott Galloway joins Hari Srinivasan to discuss his new book, concentrating on where conversations around masculinity have gone wrong.
Bianna, thanks. Scott Galloway, thanks so much for joining us. You just wrote a book called Notes on Being a Man, about the crisis affecting young boys and men. And on a recent podcast, you said, no group has fallen faster in America than young men. Lay out the kind of problem case for us. Why is this book necessary for young men today? I mean, why aren't they being prioritized?
Hari, always good to see you. Thanks for having me. So the data is pretty stark. If you go into a morgue and there's 5 people who've died by suicide, 4 are men. They are 3 times more likely to be addicted, 3 times more likely to be homeless. So when we say we have a homeless problem and an addiction problem, it would be fair to say we have a male homeless and a male addiction problem.
Now, we've been saying that over here on this side of YouTube for quite a while. And of course, it's vilified, right? You're ignoring, the women and children and LGBT. But no, Scott is absolutely right. Some of these issues are so overwhelmingly male that they should be described as such. And don't doubt it. If it was majority women that were homeless, they wouldn't call it homeless. It would be targeted specifically at women, especially if it was Black women. They would lead with that. But when it's male, it's just kind of ignored as far as that. And I talk about that in my book as well. The way they kind of, use statistics when it comes to men to bolster other demographics when they want attention for something, especially if they need money or funding for it. But if it's men, it's kind of defaulted in a way where it's genderless, right? But if it's women, it's talked about as women. So I appreciate that he's being forthright here with that. That needs to happen.
7 men are now referred to as NEETs, and that is neither employed in education or in training. Only 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 is in a relationship, and 2 in 3 women under the age of 30 are in a relationship. And you think, well, that's mathematically impossible. It's not, because women are dating older because they want more economically and emotionally viable men. And the result is, I believe, that we're slowly but surely producing or evolving a new breed of, or a new species of asocial, asexual males. It's as if we're planning our own extinction. And
now, where I have differences, this is one of them. And this is one of the more subtle ones. But he's looking at this in terms of what mainstream society is manufacturing, right? He's suggesting that this is something that these young males are being produced, but he's removing the agency of men. You know what I mean? Some of this, and we talk about that in these circles as well, some of this is very purposeful. Men are not just, these things are not just happening to men. There are many men who are doing this on purpose, this is really a protest of sorts, not only against society, but particularly against the kind of culture that women have kind of bolstered over the last few decades. It's a culture of entitlement. It's a culture of female superiority. And so you have men that are saying, you know what, I'm not going to participate in this. I'm going to focus on my peace. I'm going to withdraw from all of this, and I'm going to find what makes me happy. You know what I mean? Whether it's traveling abroad, whether it's going fishing, whether it is. Now, where I do agree is there are young men who have not, who've not activated if we could put it that way. They've not actively joined society. In fact, even if they're focusing on themselves, you got a lot of young men that are living at home and so on and so forth, and not really attempting to find a life. And even amongst Black men, we push our sons to do that. You need to find a life. You're not just going to stay at home indefinitely and that kind of thing. But the way he talks about young men in general, I think removes the kind of agency that many men have engaged in terms of their problems with society. Men are not generally just going to, picket and walk the streets with signs, and that's not how they're going to do it. As Obsidian has said for years, they're going to vote with their feet. They're going to change their behavior until society adapts, until policies around marriage lighten up and start to address male concerns. That's why what's been happening in the last few months in Arkansas and the 50-50, custody standard as far as divorce is concerned, those kind of things make a difference. Those are the kind of things that if you do more of them, especially if you look at the Black male political agenda, follow some of the policies we have there, those are the kinds of things that might entice men to marry if they know that there are protections that'll prevent them from just losing half of what they have or more because she whimsically decides she's no longer happy. So these kinds of policies have catered to women for so long that men have just kind of withdrawn. There's no benefit. There really is no benefit, especially if you don't want children, if you already have kids, there's really not a lot of benefit to marriage. But even if you want kids, it's still not worth it. And you have some men going abroad, or some men are just washing their hands of it and accepting that they'll never have them. You know what I mean? And so until you address the policies and provide some protections for men, they're going to continue to withdraw. So I just want, in that respect, I don't like the way he kind of removes the agency and downplays really a form of protest that men are engaging in.
If you look at the most violent, looking to the ramifications here, if you look at the most violent, unstable society in the world, they have a preponderance of one thing, a disordinate amount of young men with a lack of economic or romantic opportunities. So I think it's a real problem. And unfortunately, I think that the unearned privilege of men of my generation has resulted in a lack of empathy for young men who don't have the same opportunities that I had.
You kind of break down parts of your code into 3 roles that men should be playing. They should protect, provide, and procreate. Break that down for us.
Well, I think in a capitalist society, when I talk about not necessarily about the way the world should be, but the way it is, I think men need to be economically viable. And I think a decent place to start as a man is to bring the focus and energy and discipline and pursue certification such that you can be economically viable. Show the discipline that you can make some money and save more than you spend. And assume that you should take economic responsibility, which is sometimes means to get out of the way and be more supportive of your partner who might be better at this whole money thing. Because I think, unfortunately, our society disproportionately evaluates women on their aesthetics, and it disproportionately evaluates men on their economic viability. But the whole shooting match, the whole reason you get strong, smart, certified, and establish some prosperity is that your default operating system should be to move to protection. And that is, if you think about the most masculine jobs, whether it's a fireman, a cop, or someone in the military, at the end of the day, what they're really doing is protecting. And Hari, I know you have kids. I feel most at ease and most as if I have purpose when I know my kids are safe, my partner feels noticed, and I feel good about myself. I protect my family, and then I can move to protecting the community, protecting the country. And then the ultimate expression of masculinity, I think, is to plant trees, the shade of which you won't sit under. And then the final thing is procreation.
Well, that's part of the problem. What he's subtly suggesting here, and I think there are many in society that agree with him, is that men should continue to play the default role that's been expected of us since whatever. We generally refer to it as the 1950s, but it's been longer than that. Protect and provide. The subtext being produce families that you protect and provide for. But what he's kind of looking over in this kind of focus on men needing to step up and play these roles is he's not addressing why they're not playing them. Again, this goes back to, when you don't acknowledge the agency of why men are doing what they're doing, then you talk about it in terms of, how men need to step up. You talk about it in terms of, being critical of men and suggesting that they're just not manly, they're weak, they're making these decisions he's not even framing it as decisions. He's just suggesting that this is what's happening. But if you look at it from the vantage point of intentionality and a purposeful kind of withdrawal, then then the language changes on how you address it. Right? And so when you start talking about protecting and providing, you can then ask the question, why aren't men willing to do that? Why are they withdrawing from those social roles that societies depend on? Well, I mean, and he's acknowledged this along with his boy Richard Reeves and other publications and videos. That, you know, if you create an environment where you vilify men, especially on the left, you vilify men and you call them toxic and you say that they're everything, you know, negative under the sun, especially from boyhood on, where they're absorbing these messages in media, you know, from childhood onward. There's no incentive for them to do this. There isn't. I mean, why? I'm going to go do this knowing full well that, as far as culturally speaking, there's women in the West have pretty much been raised to believe that my job as a man is to serve them. So first of all, I got to compete with other men to serve her, right? And in the dating market, it's such that I'm supposed to provide things that used to be provided for a wife. I'm supposed to start providing those things within the first couple of weeks of dating, right? Pay her rent, you know, pay her bills, you know, buy things for her, impress her. So I have to compete with other men to pay for her and her lifestyle. That's the social expectation. And then if we get married, of course, I have to continue to protect and provide and so on and so forth. She can do whatever she wants. She can have kids, she can not have kids. She can adopt, she can work, she can not work, she can work part-time, she can own a business, she can decide to be a stay-at-home wife. You know, women, of course, since the rise of feminism, have created an environment where they can do whatever they want to do. And this is where Scott comes in, but men still have to play the same role. And he's trying to advocate for the kind of social values and the social approval, you know, that men, you know, are supposed to get. And I would argue they're not getting that anyway, men that are providing those things. But, you know, he's saying that the old kinds of mechanisms, support mechanisms for enticing men to play this social role are somehow still there. And you just do it because it's the right thing to do. But if you refuse to acknowledge why they're not doing it, if you refuse to acknowledge the role women are playing in this, and the only way Scott deals with women is to compliment them and really not hold them accountable to too great a degree. Every now and again, he'll drop a little zinger, but for the most part, the women are perfect, you know, fairies that fly around and they're made of pure light and heavenly, and the men are just fucking up. And this is the kind of approach that I disagree with, you know, and I know why, because essentially he's trying to appeal to the left, which is very female leaning. And he, instead of being critical of them, like we are, like I am, he's trying to be complimentary. And he's basically, you know, making a plea. He's essentially asking these women to advocate for their own sons. You know, that's kind of where he's coming with it. And in so doing, he's not critiquing them. But I think this approach is a bit disingenuous in terms of the realities of what women have participated in, the culture they've developed over the last half century, the perspectives about men that society has kind of reinforced. And then, of course, the entitlement that comes with that. I think you cannot address these issues without acknowledging those things and that men are responding to those things. See, if you want to remove that whole part from the discussion, then it just looks like, you know, everything women have been doing is great. It has no bearing on men. Society's great. And if these men would just stop fucking up, everything would be fine. And more, they're failing. They're committing suicide. They're falling out of the workforce. They're not going to school. You know, and we just don't know why. It's just happening, and we just need to correct them. You can't fix this that way. You have to address it. And I noticed this even in the Black conscious community. Right? There's this expectation that, you know, men still protect and provide and build families. But of course, when you add the conscious community, we still have to be the face of revolution. We got to, you know, rise up, and, you know, there's all of those other narratives to it. But there's no willingness to confront Black women there either. And that's kind of the problem. If you're going to create a narrative where men need to improve, but you're going to ignore what men are grappling with and what they're facing and what's causing them and has been causing them stress and creating disarray, then, you know, you're putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. You're refusing to acknowledge the depth of the problem and the source of it in many respects. And it's an ongoing one at that. So anyway, here we go.
And this is more controversial, but I stand by it. I think we have pathologized men's interest in romantic and sexual relationships when it should be celebrated. And that is that fire of wanting to have a relationship, wanting to have sex, wanting to have children can be channeled, and it usually is, into very positive ways. wanting to be fit, wanting to dress well, wanting to groom, wanting to have a plan, wanting to demonstrate the ultimate secret weapon of mating from a man's perspective, in my view, and there's research to show this, have a kindness practice. So we've pathologized men's interest in romantic and sexual relationships, and I think it should be celebrated as long as it's channeled the right way.
When someone hears the procreate portion pillar here, they're going to say, well, what is the role of women in the world according to Galloway? What is his suggestion to young men on how they should interact with and perceive the other half of the species?
Well, I mentor some young men, and when I know they've come off the tracks is when they start blaming immigrants for their economic problems and when they start blaming women for the romantic problems. And to the right's credit.
See, there we go. There we go. Even in aligning whatever this critique of immigrants is with a critique of women, he's already framing it as a deflective way that cowardly men are refusing to man up. And he's already kind of putting it in that framework. And of course, at the same time, absolving women of any significant role in this at all. But, you know, I can't go with that. Because when I can sit in my classes and see 17-year-old girls demand six figures from anybody they're dating, and they're looking at the 17-year-old boy sitting next to them, both of which are first-generation Black college students, you can't run this game on me that the problem is that the 17-year-old boy in the room, and this is essentially what the difference between he and I on this is. He's basically saying the 17-year-old boy sitting next to her needs to man up, and he just needs to make six figures and make it happen. Whereas I'm looking at it like that's an unrealistic request or demand in the first place. Her family doesn't even make six figures. She hasn't even seen six figures before, but it's something she learned to require and measure men against. You know, it's a ridiculous request. So I'm saying that doesn't work, and this approach that he has to it, I think, it you know, you're blaming it in men, but you're refusing to look at the larger context.
Credit, they recognize the problem with young men before anybody, but their solution was to conflate masculinity with coarseness and cruelty and take America back to where it was in the 50s when non-whites and women had less opportunity. They've somehow decided that there's an inverse correlation between women's ascent and men's descent, and that's just not true. I think we have to do.
And by the way, I'm speeding this up. It's about at 125 speed. So let me know if it's too fast. I didn't want us to be here for another, few hours, but let me know if it's too fast, if you guys aren't hearing it, if you want me to slow it down. But anyway, yeah.
Teach our young boys that we should be celebrating, and men, our sisters and our mothers' ascent. It's absolutely wonderful. No group is.
See what I mean? It's absolutely wonderful. No, it's at the expense often of men and boys. That's fundamentally where we part. But again, I understand it. If you're trying to appease women and you're actually trying to get them to support, especially policies on the left, this is the approach you kind of have to have. Problem with that, though, is we spent so much time watching young men be vilified on the left that most men are not waiting on the left to give them shit. Right? The right only started to care when it was politically useful for them to do so, and they were able to win an election on it. But at this point, it's just a question of which of the dominant political parties are going to mobilize in any significant way to dramatically shift their whole focus on how they address men and boys. That's the question. The right doesn't seem to have a clear-cut policy, and the left has had a clear-cut policy of naming men and boys monsters. We're just, but since they've just lost, of course, this last presidential battle, the question is, are they going to be able to reframe and rebrand on the left and actually start to address men and boys in a manner that is humane? That's the question. Now, I haven't seen much yet to suggest that they're doing a lot of work on that front, which means that the right doesn't have to do very much because the left doesn't seem to be doing anything. So anyway.
Is ascended faster than women globally. More are seeking tertiary education than men. And I think, unfortunately, because of these algorithms and certain trends, popular trends in the media, the genders have done a great job of convincing themselves that it's the other gender's fault. A lot of men, unfortunately, in the manosphere want to blame women for their problems. Again, that's toxic and just totally incorrect.
See what I mean? See, this is how you get feminists, to jump on board and pat you on the head and say you're doing a good job as a man. You're avoiding being critical of us. You're allowing us to basically, function without any kind of accountability. And You could just blame it on those crazy guys in the manosphere because they're the source of all of these problems. The thing about it though, manosphere, and I've said this over time, Black manosphere especially, has really only given clarity to explain why men are doing what they're doing, even to men. But if you actually look at men's behavior, withdrawing from, certain types of societal activities like family formation, marriage, so on and so forth, these things were already happening. Men just kind of explained why. And really, men needed it, often to understand it ourselves. But men have been withdrawing for years. I mean, if you look at the stats on marriage, Black men especially started to withdraw from marriage in the 1960s. This has been going on for a while. This is not new. Manosphere is only a few years old. See, but it's a comfortable way for the left to frame the problem as something that the manosphere has created. So these crazy men online have created, and then they go find the most extreme examples. And then from there, they find the most extreme video clips and they'll play them real quick, highly edited. They'll play it. He's crazy. He's a misogynist. That's what these men are doing. There are so many different approaches to these issues. If you look at the last decade and you look at all the people online who are involved in these discussions about how to improve the quality of life for boys and men, yeah, you'll find some extremists. You'll find people who are here just to grift. You'll find people who, follow whatever the trend is, whether it's celebrities one week or, whatever it is. You'll find that, but you'll find that everywhere. And then you'll also find people that are sincerely concerned with improving the quality of life for men and boys, and are giving out suggestions, that are working on new ideas, trying to have dialogue, even, going to do research, all kinds of different things. There are plenty of men doing that, but those aren't the ones that get foregrounded. Those are not the ones that get interviewed and studied and what they have to contribute being taken seriously. It's much easier to deflect the entire conversation, from actually being had by just, those crazy toxic guys, which is basically a reinforcement of what the left has been saying about men in general. So you don't have to be Andrew Tate. You're already a misogynist simply because you're male. The whole notion of toxic masculinity on the left has basically pushed that argument. So by the time the manosphere comes into mainstream attention, it just reinforces the left's idea of toxic masculinity, and it doesn't have to deepen the conversation or require any nuance. It simply is what it is. So it's an easy way to dovetail the two away, to deflect away from conversations that are uncomfortable and would force accountability on institutions and demographics, such as women, all together.
Correct. But also, quite frankly, there is a bit of a zeitgeist and an unhealthy theme online among young women that young men don't have problems, they are the problem. And also on the far right, while they conflate masculinity with coarseness and cruelty, the far left's answer to the masculinity crisis is to tell young men to act more like a woman. I don't think that's helpful either.
Now, see, this is where there are moments of alignment. I agree with what he said there. He mentioned very quickly, you notice how if you tried to clock it, how he pointed out that there are women on there online that see men as the problem, and then he moved right past it. That is as far as you'll hear the critique. Now, I can say in the Black community, that kind of language has been going on as far as being critical of men and seeing men as less than human for over half a century. So you can pay all of this attention to where you think men are the problem, but you can take what women have been doing, especially for the last half century, and you can basically whittle it down to a 1-second soundbite and then quickly move on to the next subject as if it's not really a factor. That's problematic, and it's a bit disingenuous.
So I think the ultimate alliance is the following. I think men protect, I think women heal. And I think together they create wonderful, happy households and more humanity. And I also feel compelled to say, Hari, that masculinity and femininity, which should be celebrated, both of them, are not sequestered to the people born as males or females. I think there's some women who demonstrate wonderful masculine features, and I think there's men that demonstrate wonderful feminine features. So let's celebrate femininity.
Part of the problem there is that women have been socially pushed to demonstrate masculine features, and men have been socially pushed to demonstrate feminine features. This is something he just kind of mentioned a minute ago, and then he flipped to the reverse, so not as to offend anybody, right? But men have been, pushed into, this question of just being help, being in the passenger seat, while the woman is portrayed as the one who's out there. She's on the ascent, she's doing her thing, she's magical, and men just have to learn how to serve and support, be a support feature, even though women will demonstrate in their behavior that they don't have any great love or respect for men that do that. So in one vein, and this is where it becomes extremely confusing, particularly for young men, is society has been socially trying to push young men into being servile, especially in regard to women, and push women to be leaders. But women in turn are socially punishing men who play those roles and advocating for men who don't. So it's a confusing dynamic as a young man to walk into. Society's telling you one thing, women's behavior is telling you another thing. Where do you go? And nobody really wants to address you on any large scale, because the left doesn't think as a male you should be addressed. Right? The right only kind of looks at you when it's politically useful for them to do so. Right? So nobody wants to say anything. And when men create their own spaces, since there's this silence as it relates to men, then that has to be vilified in and of itself. First, it has to be collapsed, as if anybody online who's talking about maleness, one, is part of the manosphere, and two, the manosphere is one thing. That is not the case, nor has it ever been. Not for the white manosphere, not for the black manosphere. It's not one thing, nor has it ever been. It is a cacophony of voices that are sometimes at, in alignment, sometimes at war, sometimes in deep debate, and sometimes that shifts from a moment to moment basis. It is an ongoing conversation that can be an argument one day, that can be an alignment the next. But the complexity of the discussions men are having in the academy, online, in a variety of different spaces is being collapsed so that it can be dismissed and ignored. But there's no one else talking to men. See, Scott and Richard are trying to get institutions built that will support men, but they're trying to do so alongside a philosophy that does not challenge society's treatment of women and girls, does not challenge the gynofocal nature of it. It doesn't challenge the female superiority tropes that we've seen. And I talked about this on Jeff's show. If you look at the media, and I was just thinking about this last night too, because I was watching a trailer for Megan 2, and you get these micro instances of even little girls kicking not just men, but trained soldiers through walls, right? Navy SEALs, little girls in little dresses with stockings on and bows in there, and they're just kicking the shit out of Navy SEALs. These, I can't, when you've seen, literally millions of these micro instances, these micro programming clips, the movie, it could be a dream sequence in a movie. It doesn't have to be even part of the story. It could just be something that happens for a moment. It doesn't matter if it's an android, if the girl in the clip is an android or an alien, it doesn't matter. Just the fact that you're seeing a visual of females dominating males, and you've been watching those since childhood, and you see clip after clip after clip after clip. It could be a movie about all women and girls. It could just be a 30-second clip in a movie that has nothing to do with that. On a certain level, as far as how we process media, it doesn't matter. As long as the visual is taken in, that's it. And we keep seeing that. That is a form of social conditioning. That is a form of social engineering. And nobody wants to call it out, but it's still happening. So you've been convincing boys that they aren't shit. They're not capable of anything. And fundamentally, girls are just better on every level, simply because they're girls, not because they've been trained, not because they've studied, not because they've meditated and reflected upon, the relationship with the world. Has nothing to do with that. They are simply better because they have vaginas. And you've been telling your boys this since childhood. But now you're wondering why they don't want to participate. And you want them to pick up the same motivations your grandfathers had in terms of protecting and providing, but you haven't given them a reason to. You haven't given them a reason to even want to have a family. Why should they? See, the two can't work together. You have to acknowledge how society's been treating boys and men, and not just on the surface level. And you have to acknowledge the way that treatment has allowed women and girls to become so entitled that they participate openly and with glee tearing down men and boys, while at the same time saying they want one. They want to marry, they want to have children, and then further critiquing men and boys by suggesting that men are now too weak and too cowardly to give them children. No, this is their responses are the response to something. But anyway.
Let's celebrate masculinity and let's restore the greatest alliance in history, and that is the alliance between men and women.
You talk a lot about your own life and the disadvantages and advantages that you had. And I can see a recent college grad watching our conversation. And when it comes to economic opportunity, they can say, you know what, I read that book, Scott, and that's pretty nice, but you were able to afford an apartment. You didn't have massive college debt hanging over your head. You didn't know whether or not AI was going to completely consolidate a lot of entry-level white-collar positions that I'm applying for today. How much of this is this disillusionment, I guess, for young men today, a circumstance of the climate that we're living in?
My response to that would be that you're 100% correct. I'll just run through it. I got assisted lunch. I got into UCLA when there was a 74% admissions rate. I was one of the 26% that didn't get in. I applied again and I got in. The admissions rate this year will be 9%. I got Pell Grants. Immigrants built my companies. I came of age during the internet. If you look at 1945 to 2000, 5% of the population in America registered a third of the economic growth globally. And then all of that massive prosperity was crammed into 1/3 of the population that was essentially white heterosexual males. Let me be clear. I had unfair, unprecedented, historic advantage, historic wind in my sails. But that's no reason to hold it. A 19-year-old is paying the price for my privilege. So we have a debt on.
Now, one thing that I will give credit to people like Scott for is being honest about certain things. I hear people arguing about whether or not racism exists, whether or not white supremacy exists. He just framed it for you. Sometimes people talk about racism or whatever as if it's something that just happened somewhere in the 1800s. He just explained to you structurally how it works. And he's absolutely right. I mean, even for Black folk that went to college, we didn't have the same experiences he did. Right? So he explained it well, and I appreciate that level of detail, because those are the kinds of differences that put somebody like a Scott Galloway into a multi-million-dollar position as a professor versus the professors I know who are nowhere near that. Had a very different road getting to where they are. And those are just amongst professors. Obviously, we can talk about Black folk at a variety of levels that whether or not they ever went to school. So I appreciate him listing out the various structural ways that there were benefits that allowed for him to function the way he does at the level he does. Those things are not accidental, and many of those things have been removed. But those were generally things that most Black folk never had access to in the first place. But let me continue.
On a couple levels. When we have an obligation to get involved in the lives of young men that aren't ours, the single point of failure for a young man coming off the tracks is when he loses a male role model. And they're super easy to find, young men without a male role model. Just ask around your office for single mothers. You don't have to be a CEO. You don't have to be an adolescent psychiatrist. Does the kid want to come over and watch a ball game with me? Would he be interested in coming over and hanging out? They are young men and boys everywhere, and it is so easy to add value. And then part of that debt also is my generation to start paying it forward, or paying it back, if you will, and stop these economic policies that keep transferring wealth from young people to old. The two biggest tax deductions in our tax code are mortgage interest rate tax deduction and capital gains. Who owns homes and stocks? People my age. Who rents and makes their money from current income? Young people. They're the scariest statistic in our society right now, Hari. And the epicenter of, I think, the majority of what ails our nation is the following. For the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at the age of 30. These are solvable problems. Tax holidays, minimum wage of $25 an hour, national service, tax deduction on current income as opposed to capital gains, universal child credit, universal child care, which I think would help young families, the $40 billion tax credit stripped out of the infrastructure bill, the $120 billion cost of living adjustment in the Social Security plan flies right through Congress. We need to stop. Old people need to stop putting their hands in the pockets of young people. This isn't rocket science. Tax credits, 8 million homes in 10 years, bring the cost of education down, and a tax policy that is truly progressive and stops stealing from young people.
One of the things, Scott, you repeat.
Now, he's absolutely right in terms of this kind of intergenerational relationship where they're really drawing more and more out of the youth. But I was going to say at the beginning of that, one of the reasons he's really talking about that, especially when he talks about spend time with youth, spend time with a young man, is again, there's a whole cadre of folk that are arguing that these young men need to stay away from the internet. That's really what a lot of it comes down to. They need to stay away, from anything manosphere-ish at all. They really don't like the response that men and young men are starting to come with from being influenced online. However, nobody had a word to say prior to these discussions taking place online. Nobody had a word to say about men and boys. Nobody cared that nobody advocated for them, that they were being treated as monsters and nobody gave a damn. Nobody had a word to say about it. But when men finally started to compare notes, have discussions, formulate their own approaches to it, then it became a problem. And now you want to try and get, upper middle class folk to find a young man in the office to work with and mentor. Okay. But nothing was said prior to that, right? Nothing about what created the circumstances and continues to create it, the alienation and exclusion of boys from social participation, let alone social advancement, especially Black boys and men. There's so many spaces where these men, the young man who just defended his dissertation yesterday, part of his research was about Rutgers itself and the way students were treated. And one of the things he noticed, and he actually had pictures as part of his dissertation defense, was the absence of Black males. They were virtually absent. And you could take what's happening at Rutgers and apply that in a lot of different spaces, and not just academic spaces at that. But the absence amongst faculty, staff, and students. And the same thing can be said for Fresno State and almost every institution I've ever been to or studied at or taught at. It's the same dynamic. And this has been going on for quite a while. And it's not just about Black males. They've been socially excluded. There are even funding pockets that were earmarked for Black students that were taken and absorbed into other demographics and other projects and so on and so forth, very purposely. But it's the absence of Black males that too many are comfortable with regardless. And this includes many of the trades. There are people that do not lose sleep if they don't see Black folk in trades, Black men at that matter. The removal and exclusion of Black males is a fundamental problem. This is why we talk about structural anti-Black misandry. It's not just, about, somebody not wanting to date you or whatever. And I'm not saying that's not important, but we're talking about how these things affect access for Black males in a wide variety of environments. And you can't address that if your sole approach to the matter is that these young men just need to stop playing video games and pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Repeatedly talk about in the book is that young men should get offline. Why?
I wrote a book on happiness because I'm finally old enough to admit this. I struggle with anger and depression. And I think I've read every peer-reviewed research paper on happiness, and they all distill around the same thing. The key to happiness, the key to purpose is deep and meaningful relationships. And unfortunately, you have 40% of the S&P by market value has a vested interest in sequestering you and polarizing you. And what you have online is a frictionless version of life where you lack the friction to teach you skills and you lack real connection. The deepest pocketed companies with godlike technology are trying to train all of our young people, and men especially, who are especially receptive to this, that they can have a reasonable facsimile of life online. Why go through the hassle of trying to navigate the pecking order to find friends, right? Hari, you're an interesting guy. I'd like to be your friend. Let's grab drinks. That feels awkward for me to say, and it's true. Why put on a tie, try to navigate the landmine of BS that is corporate America when you can trade stocks or crypto on Coinbase or Robinhood? And why would you go through the effort of looking nice, working out, showering, smelling good, having a plan, taking risks, the expense, and develop the calluses and the resilience of risk-taking with women who are much choosier than men, such that you could have a romantic and sexual relationship of your own when you have lifelike porn? Young men need to get off of their phones, get out, touch grass, take risks, engage.
So there was a little micro critique of women there. I think he said they were much choosier. That's a very lightweight way of addressing this notion of hypergamy without having to address it. Many of the men I've noticed who've gone through some of what he's describing in terms of being very isolated, not having very many friends, especially working, I usually find a lot of these young men are not even just young, because I've gone through this as well. We tend to be in spaces where there aren't very many other Black men to begin with. There aren't very many Black people in some of these spaces. But I mean, do I agree with the value of relationships? Sure. But I think to merely just dismiss it as these guys are just playing too many video games and watching too much porn, I think it's too superficial an approach. Again, the question should be, why are they withdrawing? What are the reasons behind that? Instead of just, pejoratively suggesting that these guys are just too idiotic to make friends, why don't you actually explore what they're avoiding, why they're avoiding it? What are the experiences with women that make them not want to go talk to them? What's that? You kind of suggested it, that it might have something to do with women being choosy, but that's such a superficial way of approaching that. That is just the top layer veneer of that. When you've had generations, women in your own families, you know what? Watch this shit. I wasn't planning to do this. So, every time I have something pop in my head I wasn't planning to do, you guys end up suffering in terms of how long it takes for me to find it. But you'll be happy to know that I've just found it. I just got to convince StreamYard to let me show you. So this is something that I just posted on my Facebook page. And so I got to stop that for a second. And yeah, so check this out. All right, so this is a 70-year-old woman being asked about dating a guy. I think I have to redo it here. Check this out. And it does.
Makes them not your type.
Height.
Okay. So you want a taller, a little tall.
Yes.
This lady is 70. 70. She is 70 years old. Still talking about height. When does this stop? When? When does it stop? When? When does it stop?
Is he someone that's your type?
No.
Why? What makes him not your type?
Height.
Okay. So you want a taller, a little tall.
Yes.
This lady is.
So essentially, if you're 70 and men are still not good enough because they're not 6'2", and you're going to suggest to me that the problem is that men are just spending too much time online, not associating with women. And some people like to suggest that this is only happening online. I can't tell you. When I have students tell me what they require, what they're interested in, what they want from a man in my classes, it doesn't change. And the thing is, they've been talking about this longer than it was a trend on social media. I'm Gen X. I heard this shit in the 80s. That was when it was developed. I heard it in the 80s. Before 1990, I remember girls my age in high school talking about you have to have a car, you have to have your own apartment, you have to have six-pack abs, you need to be over 6 feet tall. This shit was happening then. But when you hear 70-year-old grown women, and trust me, I didn't need a video clip on social media. I got family members, women in their 70s. I see them in society. I see them on campus. This is not new. And yes, many of them are still talking like this. It's ridiculous. So again, when you want to blame young and old men for not wanting to participate, but you don't want to address what they're exactly, removing themselves from, it's disingenuous. It's disingenuous. And I have a hard time taking you seriously if you're not going to call it the way it needs to be called, truthfully. So let me get back to Scott here. All right.
And here are a lot of no's. I coach young men. 1, we're going to get fit. We're going to get strong. 2, we're going to start making some money, get a taste for flesh. If you have a smartphone, you can make some money. I don't care if it's being a Lyft driver or a TaskRabbiter, because once you get a little bit of money, you start learning how to make more. You get excited about it. And 3, we're going to put ourselves in the company of strangers. And then we're going to express friendship and ask somebody out to go see the ball game, and maybe ask someone out for coffee and exhibit the key skill, which I think every father needs to try and teach his son at a young age. How do you express romantic interest while making someone feel safe. And this is the goal. No, because there is no great thing in life. There's no real victory in life that isn't preceded by a ton of no's. You didn't show up and start doing national programs with millions of viewers. I can't tell you how many no's I have had in my life. So it's pretty simple. Get off your phone, get out, touch grass, get to know. And the more no's you get, that means a wonderful yes is waiting for you.
You talk about...
First of all, my first conversation with my son is not about necessarily making her feel safe. It's about making sure he knows that he has every right to be in the spaces he's going to, and that he's a man that is deserving of a modicum of respect from the average person. And if he doesn't get it, he has every right to withdraw. That's my first conversation. Before I'm talking to him about making her feel safe, I'm validating him and I'm letting him know you don't have to take none of the shit that people tell you need to take. You really don't. I have no problem with get out, touch grass, meet people. That's all well and good. That's great. But my first conversation with my son is about affirming him in an environment that doesn't affirm him. So I'm not going to ask him to do additional service as the first thing on his mind when he himself hasn't been affirmed. No, I'm going to start with that. Making her feel safe. Okay. There's a way you talk to women. You have that dialogue. You do so from a humane standpoint. We have those discussions. But at the end of the day, who affirms young men and tells them that they deserve to be here, that they deserve a certain amount of respect just for being a human being willing to say hello to you? Who advocates, especially for young men, again, who are forming their identity? If your first conversation is strictly about her well-being, but there's been no social advocacy for him on a larger scale in media, let alone interpersonally, again, when does the affirmation come into play? Get out, shake hands, get with a girl, expect no's. All right. I'm not saying there isn't a place for that, but it's not my first conversation. I'm going to advocate for the young men who often don't get advocated for. Really, that's how I'm going to approach that first.
About your dad, who passed away earlier this year, and how difficult that process was. And I wonder if just the process, the act of writing this book was hard for you, having to kind of rethink about the relationships that you had in your past with your mom, your dad. And you lay out also that his life is a cautionary tale. Why?
Yeah, this isn't an easy thing to say about your father who recently passed away. My father was not a high character person. He was married and divorced 4 times. He left his last wife when she was in late stage Parkinson's, a year away from passing away. My sister and I, my father passed away about 3 months ago. My sister and I were going to have a service for him, and then we realized nobody would come. He didn't have a single friend. So he left me and my mom when we were 8. He could have made our lives a lot easier, and he chose not to. So he was a flawed person. But what I would say is a huge unlock, not just for men, but for anybody, and it has been a huge unlock in my life, is that about 20 or 30 years ago, I decided to put away the scorecard. And instead of thinking, was my dad good or not good to me, meaning that should dictate what kind of son I am, I just said, all right, what kind of son do I want to be? What kind of partner do I want to be? What kind of boss do I want to be? What kind of friend do I want to be? And then hold myself to that standard and not have a scorecard. And I decided I wanted to be a loving, generous son. And I was that. And I got huge reward out of my relationship with him the last 20 or 30 years. And also my father checked an evolutionary box for all men. In that is he was a much better father than me, as bad as he was, than his father was to him. And he evolved and he tried to get better. But it is a cautionary tale, Ari, because as many blessings as my father had, he essentially, it had it not been for his sister or for his son and his sister, he would have died under bright lights surrounded by strangers. So it's a cautionary tale that...
I wouldn't speak to Scott's family as far as my critiques. I don't know, his father's situation. I do applaud the fact that he had a relationship with his father despite his upbringing and actually got to know him, because it's one of the things, and you're going to see why I'm emphasizing this in a moment too, in another clip that I'm going to play. But in case I don't remember to say it at that time, I do advocate, and I've been saying this for years, for men who've only gotten one side of the story from your mothers, from the women in your family. I'm not saying they're wrong. They may be 100% right. But just as a practice, I highly advocate that a man go sit down and have a conversation and find out what may have not been shared with you. Because too much of the time, men report to me that when they finally do have that discussion with the father that they were told was a monster, there's a whole other side to the dialogue that they had not heard. Most women, if they're in a position of power to tell you why your father isn't there, and this is why, partly because we're talking about predominantly single parent homes where the mother is in a position of authority. She's the one that gets to dictate what goes on and what story her children get. Most women are not gonna, they're not gonna talk about themselves in a negative way. Most women are not gonna talk about what negative things they did, not only to him, but in general. No, what woman is gonna stand up and say, I cheated on your father and he left, and and then I excluded him from the family with the family court, and I called the police on him and fabricated an accusation that didn't exist. What woman is gonna admit that to her kids? Really? What woman is going to tell her kids, well, I actually lied about paternity. He's not really your father, but I told him he was, and I made sure he paid child support. But, I really don't know who your real father is. What woman is actually going to tell that truth? As long as someone has sole authority to give their children the narrative of how their parents engaged one another and brought them into the world and so on and so forth, especially if she's the one that was able to push him out of the household, there's too many opportunities for a one-sided kind of dynamic. So I'm definitely an advocate for sitting down and finding out what the story is for yourself. Much of the time, at least from many of the men I've heard back from that have done these kind of things, it's not really one of those things where one parent is all wrong and the other parent is all right. Either way. But you find out a lot more that one parent didn't share. And usually you find out there's a whole lot of shades of gray. We have this narrative that fathers just walk away at the first mention of a child. Some have, but there are plenty that it takes a lot. Really, not just walking away. It takes a lot of pushing him away for him to go. It takes a lot. Some have had to go and start whole new families because they've been excluded to such a degree, and there's been such vitriol in that. There's another narrative too, and again, I'm going to play that in the clip once we're done with this. But I do appreciate that he went to talk to his father, but because he's white, he's dealing with a whole different social context. For Black men and Black fathers, it's a whole different conversation, and I think there's a history there that plays out a little differently. Anyway,
if you don't invest in relationships and you don't give of yourself and you're selfish, you run the risk of leaving this world alone and of failing. And he kind of made the fatal mistake around raising children. And that is, I do believe that the best thing you can do for your sons is to treat their mother well. And my dad didn't do that.
You end your book with essentially a letter to your sons. And I guess, what do you want them to know?
So his dad didn't treat his mother well. How many people can actually be raised by their mother and then tell the story about how their mother didn't treat their father well? When does that happen?
Know about the relationship that you had with your parents and how that informed you as a parent to them. Because as you just talked about your dad, you're very tender with what your mom, the role that she played in your life, and especially the end of her life when you had a far greater role as really a caregiver, and which is a completely different dynamic that most kids think will never happen to them.
I'm grateful. I had my mom, when she was diagnosed with cancer for the third and final time, I moved in with her, and it's something towards the end of her life. It's something that I will cherish the rest of my life. What I want my sons to know is the following, that first and foremost, I love them immensely. And something I got from my mom is, I think if you, in small and little ways, explicitly, implicitly, tell your kids you just think they're wonderful, and my mom did that, I don't think they can help but start to believe that themselves. And I think that's the key to success, is at the end of the day, after being fired, after being rejected by a potential romantic partner, after losing money, you can look in the mirror and think, I can add value to a company, I can make someone very happy, and things will work out for me. But also to recognize that they have a debt. They have a debt. They were born in America, which gives them unprecedented agency. They were born into wealth, which means they have an obligation to ensure that the ladder is not pulled up behind them. And finally, I end the letter with the following, take care of your mom. That's it. That's the whole shooting match.
That tells you who he's talking to when he starts talking about being born into wealth. That's not Black America at all, but we're almost done. So
that was one of the, they are the thing I'm most proud of. I'm proud of my economic security, but that's just a means. The ends is the following. And what it means to be a man is to move from prosperity to protection. And that I hope that they recognize someday that protection initially manifests itself in taking care of the mother. And then also what it really means to be a man on a broader level is what I call surplus value. Do you absorb more complaints than you complain? Do you notice people? Are you the kind of person that feels as if when someone cuts you off in traffic, you have to speed up and cut them off? When someone is rude to you at the ticket counter at Delta, and I'm describing me as a younger man, and I'm not proud of this, do you feel you need to get back in their face to restore harmony to the universe because you're so damn important? When you get to the point where you notice more of people's lives than you notice your own, you create more economic value than absorb, you listen to more complaints, you break up more fights than you start, you add surplus value. That's what it means to be a man. And that's what I hope for my boys. And again, see above, take care of your mother.
Entrepreneur, podcaster, and author, Scott.
Okay. So we'll end that one there. Right. All right. Now, let me close this. So you can tell there's a lot going on with Scott that is very personally motivated. Now, let me also say, just as an aside, anybody in their 50s, I can, how do I put this? I can feel for you, because this is really the time period where parents and uncles and aunts and whatnot start having serious health issues and start passing. And this is the time period in your life where you're expected and to step up and find new ways to take care of them. And this is a transition point. You know, the people that you've known as parents and elders now all of a sudden rely on you. And sometimes that can be pretty severe, you know. So those in that time period, 50s, you know, through 60s, as it relates to, you know, elders in the family passing and transitioning, I can relate, you know. So, you know, in terms of Scott talking about that transition point for his mother and father, I can, you know, I haven't experienced that, but I have seen my parents transition into that elder state of things where health and long-term planning is, you know, these are now discussions that have to be had. Yeah, so I can definitely appreciate that. But, you know, you could tell just in how he described, you know, his father's treatment of his mother, you know, that in many ways likely shapes a lot of his work, a lot of his approach. It's very much about protecting the feminine and vilifying the masculine while advocating for the masculine. It's an interesting kind of dynamic. Anyway, so I'm going to play a couple other clips that will hopefully give us some different types of context. Now, as it relates to Brian McKnight, so as I said earlier, Brian is somebody that in Black America has been vilified, you know, pretty significantly. You know, I'm actually surprised just at random how many Black women I can run across that hate his guts and never even heard him respond to any of this. I mean, I'm talking about over the last number of years for how he's, you know, addressed his sons, his family, so on and so forth. So as many of you may know, you know, he took to responding online, and he had to sit down with Anton Daniels about what's taking place in the family. Now, there are two clips that I'm going to play from that. One is just like a minute, I think, and the other is actually one of the 17 or so minute clips from Anton's interview. And shout out to Anton for sitting down with him. I was actually a little surprised that he came to YouTube to do that. And I was glad he did, because I wanted to hear from him what was his experience with that. So we'll get to the 17-minute one in a second, but I do want to play this clip because it gives you context about what some of us, as Black men, what we experience in regard to family. All right. So check this out.
Family.
Oh.
Prominent families in the Black Adventist Church. We both met at the college where I was going. She came.
Okay, so give me a 1 if you guys could hear that. I just want to make sure that was something that you could hear clearly. So he's talking about how he met his first wife. That is a picture of her. Okay, thanks, Alex ST, Malika. Good. Dead Set. What's good with you, Dead Set? Hope you're well, man. Yeah, so that's a picture of the first wife, and he's going to talk about how they met and what took place. So he talked about how, so far, he says, both of their, well, you know what? Hold on a second. Let me just kind of pull it back. All right, so here we go.
Our two families are two prominent families in the Black Adventist Church. We both met at the college where I was going. She came,
okay.
I was a sophomore, she was a freshman. We kind of started dating. The next year she gets pregnant. This is back when shame was a real
I
thing.
know, yep, I get it.
She's back home. She tells me she's pregnant and that she's going to get an abortion. Because I'm like, yeah, we should probably do that. You're 18. I'm 20. Why would we? I'm just about to start this whole thing. Maybe this is the route we need to go. And she agrees. But I'm like, oh, dodged a bullet. I'm going out to sign my deal in California. When I leave there and get back to Huntsville, that's when she called me and said, actually, I didn't have the abortion. So now I'm like, I got to tell my mom. My mother, who played the piano and was singing in the choir every week. You know, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, if your kid has a baby out of wedlock, you no longer can hold any church office. You can't sing up in front. You can't do it. You are held responsible for whatever the kids do. I honored my mother, and I tried to do the right thing with a woman that I hadn't even known a year yet. We got married in September, baby in November. We had sort of an agreement. You handle this part. I'm not changing diapers. I'm 20 years old. This was not what I expected to do. You made this decision. You're going to handle that, and I'm going to handle this.
Yeah.
When you make that bargain, you say, hey, you're going to take care of this. This is your responsibility. And they say, got it. And you go and you do what you have to do. You're expecting that to be the case. But we don't realize is that people will tell you whatever it is they want to tell you to keep you there until that first argument. Then the real thing starts to come out. But by then, you're looking at your life. You're like, well, and I had this conversation with my mother, like, why did you have me do this? You tried this. It didn't work. Now you got me doing it.
Right.
It was tough, but I'm already in it. We separated 4 times before we ended up getting divorced ultimately anyway.
How far into the marriage would you say the first separation?
2 years.
Because you were married for what, 13 years?
Yeah, 13.
All right, so it's not done. I'm gonna play a little more of it, but I just want to contextualize just that portion. Now, I'm only playing this clip and another clip. I'm not doing the whole interview because I think it was like 2 hours. So I'm not gonna go in and do all of that with this. But I think there were some interesting moments, and there are probably some better moments to pull out. I just really didn't want to sit through the whole 2 hours and then edit out certain things. But if you guys request it, you know, if there's something in it in particular you want me to address, I'm willing to do that. But just with what we've heard, he's introduced something that Scott didn't consider, right? Scott gave you one narrative about the role of men, the role of fathers, the role of boys dealing with absent fathers. And the narrative was what his father and mother had, where his father just didn't treat her well. Scott introduced a whole other narrative. And I know many of you can relate. Many of you can relate. You're, you know, if you're talking about being a sophomore in college, I started college at 17. So sophomore, I would have been 19. And if I'd have got somebody pregnant, right, who's a freshman, so maybe 17, 18, she first says that she wants to have an abortion. And I've been in the situation he was in, except, you know, his situation, she changed her mind and told him at the last minute she decided to have it. Interestingly, as he's signing a deal, I don't think that's a coincidence. For me, I found out after she'd already had it. I didn't even know until after she had it, you know, because that was a whole different era. And as Anton mentioned, and Brian mentioned, that shame was real at that point. Early 90s, you know, that was a time period where girls weren't trying to get pregnant. And, you know, you didn't see a lot of pregnant Black women walking around college campus. That just wasn't something I saw a lot of in the early 90s. So anyway, what he's talking about, she was going to have an abortion. She changed her mind. Now there's this whole social expectation that he play a role. But if you don't love her and you really had no plans of marrying her outside of having this child, you're all of a sudden expected to conjure all of these other dynamics that, you know, loving married couples have going for themselves simply because she's pregnant. Okay. Nobody wants to talk about how that then translates to, you know, the life relationship with children, right? How many of us, you know, want to accept the fact that our dad was roped into something that he didn't want to be roped into? Now, you know, people will say, oh, well, as long as he had sex with her, it was his fault and he needs to step up. Okay, we've heard that for the longest. But when you're 19 and you have sex with an 18-year-old and she gets pregnant and all of a sudden you're supposed to be a loving father and husband, it's just not realistic. It really isn't. And we're not allowed to say that, right? Because that really puts a lot of the onus on her. She's the only one that got to make that decision. See, it's okay to talk about her decision when it comes to it being viewed as an act of empowerment that she gets to decide. but we don't get to talk about what position that puts him in. And this is one of the reasons why in the Black male political agenda, we advocate for men having the option to opt out. If it's her body or, you know, her choice, as Dave Chappelle said, it should be his wallet and his choice. He should have the option to decide if he wants to participate or not. Just because you had sex shouldn't be, you know, it just shouldn't condemn you to 18 years of a role you don't want to play. But society thinks that that's okay because for the most part, it just means that men have to experience something and just suffer through it and man up, as they say. Whereas women can be special snowflakes that do whatever the fuck they want. All right? Everybody's good with that. But what I was going to say in regard to Scott and his family, if you have a young man that is kind of roped into something, social pressure on him and his family because of the church he was in, you know, pushes him toward marrying a woman he doesn't love, playing a role that he doesn't feel genuinely willing to play. And then they're having multiple separations, which is more than expected, right? Especially at that age. You'd have those separations with a girl you love, let alone when you didn't. All right. How then does that transfer into, you know, the kind of parent and spouse that people say you're supposed to be? I'm gonna let him continue.
So why not just break off? Why stick it out for 13 years?
For the kids. I was never in love with their mother. I wasn't. They weren't made from love to begin with. And I said this before, and people got so mad, this obligation that just because you lay with somebody now, it's sort of an 18-year sentence of some kind, or beyond that, because it's forever. There's resentment there. But at the same time, you do have these children, and you want to try to do your best to do right by them. If we were never supposed to be together like this in the first place, but we have these children, we both have to do what's right for them. And you're right. What we should have done was just separated for good then.
What's that nail in the coffin that then leads both of you to come to the conclusion that you guys are no longer good together, regardless of whether or not you have kids or not?
I think we always knew we weren't that. She may have been lying to herself if she thought otherwise. For me, when I realized I could parent those boys without her, I could be a good parent. I could be there for them and I could give them what they needed from me without being married to their mother.
Do you think that the kids were the thing that kept y'all together as long as you were?
Absolutely.
All right. See, Brian is actually talking about something that you're really not allowed to talk about as a man in society. You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to say that at the mention of pregnancy, you were more than happy to be a father. You were excited about it. You loved her. You wanted to marry her, and you were both feet in. When you introduce my body, my choice into the dynamic by law, that immediately puts men in a situation of the next 18 years of my life, at least, are determined by a woman that may have been a one-night stand, may have been someone I was dating, but then we kind of just weren't really feeling each other. Could have been all kinds of different circumstances, but now you're tied in, right? And don't be successful, whether you're an athlete or whatever, right? In his case, a singer who's about to sign a deal. He's been singing his whole life, so everybody knows he's talented. Is that an accident? But again, we're happy with saying that simply because they had sex, that should be enough to condemn him to this social role, because otherwise he just shouldn't have had sex at all. And that's such an overly simplistic way of justifying the social expectations of men, while again deflecting from the fact that there are very few for her. She basically can do whatever she wants, and he has to be subject to it. And I'll tell you this, if you actually had a dynamic where men could choose, you know, even after the pregnancy, men could choose, what do you think women's behavior would become knowing that he could opt out at any time? Do you think that would change how that worked? Let me see. Here we go. So just so you can see what we talk about, this is from the 19-point Black male political agenda. And let me see, I'll take it back to the beginning of the list. So if you come here, 19-point Black male political agenda, click on the first one, family court reform. and you'll find that it is Part D, termination of parental obligation. As we understand the law, it is a woman's right to choose whether or not she will carry a baby to term, put the child up for adoption, or abort it. Therefore, within the first 6 months of being informed about the pregnancy, men should have the right to financially disassociate themselves from it. This is formally called the financial abortion. Also, we should automate financial abortion for cases of female stealthing when a woman sabotages male contraception, and criminal charges should also be added. So anyway, just a little notification. Somebody in the chat said, don't wait for the law to change, just go monk. Others say, well, just wear a condom. Others say, and you know what? Men have been doing that for the longest. I have no problem with either. I'm not suggesting that men should be irresponsible or anything of that nature, but I do think that men should have policy options. And again, I think this might be one of those other kind of situations that cause men to socially withdraw because they know they have no protections. Right? But this is so let's look at the longer clip. And I just want to say the reason I'm pitting this interview with Brian McKnight against Scott Galloway in a particular way is not only that I disagree with Scott's framing of the dynamic between men, women, relationships, and children, but I'm also kind of recalling the conversation from last week about feminization. And I think what Scott is somewhat dealing with is he's talking about the role of men in a time period and an environment that has embraced feminization while not calling out feminization at all. In other words, he's just saying adapt, deal with it, rather than acknowledging that feminization might actually be causing a lot of these problems in and of themselves, and that men should have a variety of ways of dealing with it as opposed to just being expected to dance harder, to run faster. Why don't we actually address the reason men are withdrawing? And if we step back and put it in frame, feminization has a lot to do with it. Feminization is not just that women are taking over certain industries, and even in the mainstream, the kind of deferring to women and femininity is happening on a larger scale. It's not just that. It's that in order to do so, it's happening at the expense of men and boys. That's one of the fundamental issues that we have to talk about when we deal with this, right? It's that it's happening at the expense of men and boys. And it's not an accident that it is. So if you're not going to address that, it's a problem. So we turn to Brian McKnight because we actually find that his relationship with his wife is emblematic of a lot of the relationships between Black men and women. And how for Black males not addressing feminization and coming at it the way Scott does, suggesting that men just got to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and take whatever shit that they're thrown, it doesn't work. Especially doesn't work for us. And we've been experiencing feminization on a very vigorous scale for much longer than the mainstream society has been talking about it. See, this is why men are withdrawing, and Black men are socially withdrawing in ways that other men are still catching up with. But there's a reason for it. It's because we've dealt with it longer. It's been brazen. It's been in our face, right? So I'm using Brian McKnight to kind of give us an example of what that looks like and why Black men are responding the way I do, the way they are. Because really, I don't know if it's just purely an interracial relationship he's in now. He's married to, I think his wife is Asian. I don't know if he's a passport bro, but between going monk, going interracial, intercultural, which doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a different racial group, so to speak, but shifting away from Western women, especially the Western women in the Black community, that's not an accident. So let's look a little bit at this. So this is one of the interviews.
Families are too prominent.
Not that one. Okay, so I have to pull it up from the actual site. Go ahead and do that. There we go. All right, so this is Anton Daniels. They trashed my home, had multiple baby mothers, Brian McKnight, on his grown sons getting kicked out. So now we're going to look at, the relationship he had with his sons and how it came about. Now, I thought this was interesting, but what I want to frame this with as we watch this is that much of this, in terms of his relationship with his sons, had a lot to do with how their mother kind of approached the dynamic, right? A lot of the venom. And he's not going to talk about it in this clip as much, but I do think the framing of his relationships with his sons was pretty interesting. And they strike me as young men who've been heavily influenced by their mother. But anyway, let's check this out.
The plan that I had for them, since they weren't going to go to college, that they wanted to be in music. I'm on tour. I'm on several world tours at this point. She agreed to let them come back. She continued to get her money. And I took them all over the world with me because I said, listen, you didn't grow up like me. I grew up singing in front of people, in church, everywhere. You guys have learned in the studio and you're great, but you need to know what it's like to be out here on stage, to know the grind of having to have the lobby call and be on time, the grind of having to do sound checks and be there and perform. And so come out with me. I'll have a section of my show where you guys come out. I can introduce you. You can start to feel what it's like. And we did that for a while, a good while. Right up until there's so much going on at this point. They're back with me. They, every day I have about 20 kids in my house, just on the floor. There's weed. There's all this other kind of stuff going on.
So wait a minute. So they're with you.
They're with me.
But now they're starting to get out of control in a sense.
In the midst of all of this, I got these jokers in my house who will show up, come in and not even speak to me. Like, hell, Mr. McKnight, thank you for having us or anything like that. It's like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
The things that are going on. Both of their girlfriends are living at the house, along with all these other people who just, sleeping on the floor,
So they're living like rock stars.
Oh, yeah, completely. Because when I'm gone, my cars are there, my bikes are there, everything,
because you're on tour.
I got to lock everything down. I got to remember, because but they all have their own cars. That's the other thing. We'll get into that in a minute, but things just started getting out of control. So we did a tour where it's my brother, Take Six, my two boys, and myself. It's sort of like a McKnight. We're going to, the next phase of what we're doing. We got 4 shows left. We come home, and the two boys say, we miss our girlfriends. We ain't going back. We're done. We're done here.
No.
The promoters, everything's like, what's happening? What's going on?
Yeah.
I'm like, I got to go do the rest of these shows by myself, which is fine, or whatever. What most people don't know is that before Leilani ever moved in with me, we were already becoming estranged. She's the one that brought us back together.
Wow.
Fair use. So he's already talking about the difference in his first wife and his second wife, even though I don't think at this point they're married yet, but he's already talking about the difference. And it's understandable, not only because of the stuff we talk about in terms of what black men and women grapple with one another, but also this added layer of these two kids getting together, simply because they had children. And all the social expectations of what he's supposed to be as a father and a husband at this time period in his life, right? So added on top of the issues black men and women face, this issue of feminization that I'm talking about in a black context that's different from a white context, add to that 2 kids getting together because they had a kid, and all the problems that come with that.
It was 2015, my birthday. And we have that moment of, let's get it together. Let's try. My wife facilitated that.
Wow.
And then she was my girlfriend. Yeah. So
she wasn't even the wife at the time.
As a blended family, Jack and Julia, who are Leilani's, who are my children now, we did so many things all together. But remember, we're not married yet. Not married yet. Somewhere along the way, when we decided to get married, that's when things started to go sideways.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I could speculate. In my opinion, the narrative about me was that I wasn't capable of loving somebody. I wasn't capable of being a faithful husband. I wasn't, capable. And he'll never get married. Oh yeah, he can act like this. He can put this woman on his Instagram, but he won't get married. Well, now he's getting married. Well, he's not gonna get married. He's not gonna go through with it. Even so much so that, it's crazy. When I was out in the street, doing everything under the sun, because I lived my 20s and my 30s.
Yeah.
As a single man.
Yep.
No problems, no anything.
So Nothing. It wasn't until you actually started to transition into really being that faithful,
Right.
that person that they weren't expecting for you to become, that then it started to
Well,
create that environment or that problem?
because I wouldn't become that for them.
Oh, okay. I got what you're saying.
He isn't capable of doing that, but it's obvious that I am.
But as long as you,
This is something that I think is, now I think all people experience it, but men experience it in a very particular way, right? Where you're held to a standard and an idea based on how you navigated it at a certain time in your life, right? And I think the other clip I played of him earlier is so important right now in this part of the discussion. He talked about, he was basically out in the streets in his 20s and 30s. I mean, what do you expect? He's a superstar R&B, singer. So he's internationally known. He's getting stuff thrown at him left and right. But also, he's a young man that married a woman he didn't love because they had a child. Right? So all the social expectations heaped upon him because of the choice he made to marry her, but also because they have this child that he didn't want. So that's the thing you're not allowed to talk about. And you don't want to, because you don't want to even hurt your own kids. But the reality is, you had a child because she decided to, and you were kind of roped in, not only due to your family's, beliefs, but also society's expectations of you. You had to play a role and be a father in a dynamic you never wanted. And I'm not talking about the marriage. I'm talking about just having the child, right? Just that alone. So you're playing that role because of those social expectations, but you never wanted to be in it. So now he's being punished, and he's treated, as he said a moment ago, as incapable of being loving. Not that he was incapable. He just didn't have those feelings for you. And he actually said she didn't have them for him. She chose him, right? Right when he was signing the deal, all of a sudden she wanted to have a child. She chose him. He was locked in. He played the role, but she has condemned him, and more than likely in the minds of her sons as well, that their father was incapable of being loving. No, that's you caught him at a very particular time in life, and you roped him into something, and you knew based on his upbringing that he was going to play a certain role in your life, in the child's life, so on and so forth. You knew that, right? But because he didn't love you, and he was in the position he was in at that time, he's that for all time, as far as you're concerned. I went through this after my wife died. There was just a period of time where I wasn't really ready to even think about marriage or anything of that nature. And, I dated several people that would swear to you to this day, he is incapable of loving and marrying. No, you just met me at a time period where that was inconceivable. I just put my wife, rhetorically speaking, I just put her in the ground. It wasn't something I was capable of. But for some people, there's still people out there to this day that will tell you that Hasan is incapable of marrying and whatever. No, you just met me at a very particular time. This is something that I notice happens to men, where you are permanently locked into this image other people have of you based on who you were at a particular time. And they don't qualify for the fact that you might have been making those decisions for a reason at that time. They think this is who you are for all time. And if it's an ex, especially if she's had your children, and then you go on to have a relationship that works out with someone else, she's got nothing but venom for you, because she looks at it like she wasn't good enough for you to love, when it could have simply been, that's not where you were at that time. And truthfully, neither one of you were at that time for each other, right? But it's interesting to see how men get framed in this way. Here we go.
In the streets,
In the streets, it's cool. So much so that even after a second marriage, she's been married again, right?
Yeah.
Still named McKnight. Isn't that strange?
Yeah. That's the culture that we live in which there's so much decentering from men, but at the same time leveraging them to get what it is that you want from them, that now, and I've seen it with a lot of other celebrities, to where the actual ex-wife continues to either have a career or create visibility for themselves by still attaching themselves to that person that they're no longer in a relationship with and haven't been in a relationship with for a long time. And so I don't think that that's singular to just you.
Right.
I think that that's the nature of women. It just is what it is.
It's so disrespectful.
It is.
It is what it is. So moving right along, we ended up getting married. My best men are Jack and these two boys. All both, and I'm going to bequeath you this video so you can make it a part of this.
Yep.
Where they're happy. They're toasting. Leilani is thanking me for allowing her to love them as her own children as we have this family. And even the younger one saying, now we're a family.
I'm incredibly happy. I wouldn't want anyone else but you, Leilani. I'm so happy, no, honestly, I'm so happy to have you, Jack, Julia, and the rest of your family as a part of our family now. And I'm happy to be a part of yours. I know let's do this. And I'm gonna try this without crying, because I'm literally tearing up right now. Tonight's about love, guys. And that's really it. So I wanna lift my glass with all of you guys right now, everyone. You got water, orange juice, lean, whatever you got in there, hold it up. And we're gonna toast to the fact that two people seal the love that they have for each other. They invited us all to be here, every one of us in this room.
Fast forward to 2 years later. Now I got stop. So I missed something, and this is very, very important. I really need you to hear me on this one. On or about 2015, the oldest son has children of his own. Now, when he had the first one,
more than one.
When he had the first one, the woman he had the children with went on, I think, welfare or something. Now, what I didn't know is when you get that assistance that you're accruing as the father.
Yeah.
You got to take it back.
They're gonna come back and
they're gonna come back and get it.
Yeah.
His last address after I had moved them out of my house because I couldn't take the weed smoke and all that. But I told him, listen, here's an apartment. It's brand new. I'm gonna pay for it for a year while y'all get yourselves together. You are now 25 and 22. 25 or 24 and 21.
So you were still trying to help them to become the men that they were supposed to be,
right?
Even though they were fully grown adults.
24 and 21. Here's your place. Now all your friends come over there. Be creative. You have all these people staying with you. Have them pay some rent, $100 here, whatever you have to do while you guys can get your music off the ground. They had produced a record at my house. It was out. It was doing well. My whole team put them at the Roxy on Sunset.
Yep.
They start doing live gigs. Not 50 people showed up the first time. The second one, maybe 75, 100 people showed up. It's going too slow. They quit. Here's this apartment. I'm gonna pay for everything, but get your life together. Figure out what you're gonna do. You have this much time. A year passes. They still haven't done it. I said, okay, I'll do another year. Here's your second year.
So they're 26 at this point and 27 years old at this point.
They're 26 and 23 by then, right? But we're getting married.
Yeah.
I'm leaving to go out of the country, and I get detained because they're looking for him.
Yeah.
And we have the same name.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Yep.
He now has two from that same girl. And Leilani and I and her mother, we sat them down and said, listen, what are y'all going to do? You got to get together. Well, she says to me, well, he told me he was going to pay for everything.
Ooh.
As a grown man?
When the second one comes, he comes and tells me that he just happened to be over there and she raped him. And I'm like, what? What is happening? This is where we are now?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this I don't have enough detail about. I don't have as many details as I need to properly understand this. They're dismissing it as most people do. Now, could it be that his son just made this shit up? Could be. And if that's the case, then I have no empathy for him. But as a scholar, there are hundreds of thousands of documented cases of men being sexually violated and raped. Yes, that is a real thing. And so in this, I just want to qualify that. I don't know what his son did. Now, based on the story, his son doesn't have a good track record. So, it could very well be nothing, to advocate for there. But I do want to be clear. Men do experience rape. They do. And there are a variety of different forms. And if the result of that experience is a pregnancy, men are still on the hook to pay for it, even if they've been violated. Whether it's an older woman and an underage young man or boy, if it's a product of sleep rape, where you're violated in your sleep, and there are even instances where people have been known to pretend to be another person climb in bed with you. There was a particular case I remember reading over a decade ago of a guy whose wife had a twin sister. And in the middle of the night, he was asleep and he woke up and she was on top of him. He assumed it was his wife. Didn't know it was his sister. That is actually a form of rape. There are a variety of them. Even technically, if you talk about being in prison and there's a female security guard, by law, if y'all are having sex, it is considered a variation of rape. So there are many different kinds. Some we laugh at, some that I think should be taken far more seriously. I don't know what the case is for Brian McKnight's son, but as I said, he doesn't have a great track record as far as I'm concerned, so I don't know, but it is nonetheless what's on the table. So here we go.
So we go ahead and get married in a fairy tale ceremony. I'm gonna give you all the video so you can see it. About 6 months later, the oldest calls me. He's like, listen, I don't have a place to stay. Can me and my new girlfriend come live with y'all for a while?
Both of them?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So this
Wow.
isn't even the original girl?
No.
Wow.
As a father, I had to put my foot down because if I give in to this again,
Yeah.
I said, no, you're going to have to figure this out. You're now 26, 27 years old. You got these two kids you're not taking care of.
Yeah.
You got this woman who now he has another baby with.
So he's a two-time baby daddy.
He's got this. And it's not about the baby daddy.
And I'm just, that's
it's
just
about,
what it is.
you got to take care of your business. I'm not here to take care of, I got my own stuff I got to deal with.
Yeah.
Take care of it. So now he's having to deal with things on his own. And that's when, in 2019, when we decided to leave LA, he goes on his Instagram and tells everyone that he was abandoned, that I abandoned him, his brother. Abandoned.
Yeah. And let me say this. I just have to say this because I was having a conversation and a girl overheard and I said, yeah, I'm gonna go talk to Brian McKnight and I want to get his perspective and his words. And the girl was like, no, because he abandoned his kid. And I'm like, wait a minute. You don't even know.
Right.
You going based off of do you not want to hear it from all sides first before you come to this conclusion? But see, this is why guys are so bitter. And this is my opinion. I know I'm interviewing you, but this is my opinion. This is why guys are so bitter because anybody can spin a narrative and then it completely, try to ruin your reputation that you've spent a lifetime building. And instead of us having these grown men hold themselves accountable and take care of their business and take care of their kids, now they basically are baby boy. It's baby boy. It's literally baby boy all over again. And it aggravates me because they've benefited from you, but haven't really lived up to any expectations whatsoever.
None.
That bothers me. It really does bother me. So he goes on Instagram and basically says all of this crazy stuff.
Yep. I'm in the air flying to Guam. I got a show.
Yeah.
I land and my phone blows up.
Yeah.
My wife is like, look at this. What is this? Too many times they showed up at her office after I told them no.
That's crazy.
And my wife gave them whatever they wanted out of her money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's our money, but
yeah, I understand.
Out of her money because she felt a certain kind of way about what was going on and she wanted to help them. She had offered them to get them jobs.
Yeah.
They didn't want to pass there's no way they were going to pass the drug test.
I don't think that they wanted jobs though. They just wanted to live off you.
Yeah,
you daddy, you got to take care of them for the rest of your life. Apparently.
All right. So shout out to Anton. Powerful interview. And that was just a portion of it. So check that out if you haven't. Right. But again, so we watched Scott Galloway and he talks about his relationship with his father. He talks about especially his father leading up to his father's death. And he talks about the negative way his father treated his mother, so on and so forth. And you could tell that shapes a lot of his work, a lot of his approach to dealing with men and boys, and this whole notion that men and boys need to go out of the way to cater to women, his unwillingness to be critical of women. And when he is, he drops it and runs and transitions it right back to men. When you look at it from the vantage point of Brian McKnight, you can see a whole different element to it, right? In a way, it's almost like Brian is kind of in the role of Scott Galloway's father, but he's giving an alternative narrative, much of which has been shaped by the mother. Now, the particular clip I played, obviously he's talking more about his sons, but you can tell that the mother had a strong influence on how her sons positioned themselves in relation to their father. This whole notion of him being a deadbeat and abandoning them. There are other parts of the story that I'm not going to, show, but you can go listen to the whole interview where you can you can better understand the role of the mother in this dynamic. And I think Scott attempts to avoid holding women accountable for their role in this feminized era where women have much more access to institutional support that allows them to impact men very differently, whether it's family court in terms of deciding whether the man can even participate in the family, whether it's reputational harm in terms of taking advantage of the public sense of what men are and who men are. So just by saying that you've been violated, abandoned, whatever the accusation may be, knowing that the public has been feminized to such a degree that they're willing to accept you at face value. Right? Those kinds of things Scott doesn't really want to hold women accountable for, because it means that on the left especially, there'll be a withdrawal of support, a withdrawal of attention, because women in general and feminists in particular are not interested in being held accountable, nor are they willing to support people who do. Right? So he kind of tap dances around a lot of that. Whereas if you really pay attention to Brian McKnight's story, he's kind of showing you this is how many women can roll, and this is what they can do, and this is what he has had to fight. This is what he's had to deal with. Now, there's a whole other clip that I want to show that kind of highlights another aspect of Black feminization, right, if you will. There's a whole other experience with what Black men go through. So this is not a long clip. This is very short. Some of you may have already seen it, and it's actually not new. I played it before when it came out, but it's kind of gotten the rounds in social media again, and I think it's worthy of discussion, and it really does impact us or play a role in this conversation about feminization in the Black community and what men experience in regard to treatment from many Black women. This is this is a mother-son dynamic, but this is an interview with Terry Crews, as some of you may remember. Here we go.
My mother felt like she owned us. And I remember she called me in the room and she said, "You got hair down there?" What?
Hair down there?
She
As
said,
in
yeah.
pubic hair?
She said, She said, "You have hair down there." I said, "Down where? What are you talking about?" "There." And she points at my private. I'm like, "Yeah, I guess." And she said, "Pull it down. Let me see. Pull your pants down." "What?" "Pull your pants down. Let me see." Man, I'll never forget it. Pull them down. I'm looking out the window. I'm just like trying to be somewhere, anywhere other than here. But it was that extreme religious control vibe where it was like, I control you to the point where I could just make you pull your pants down, inspect you. And listen, I don't think it wasn't sexual in nature, but it was definitely abusive in nature. And it was to let me know that I run this. And I remember pulling my pants up and trying to forget it for years. And I confronted my mother about it. I remember when I was grown and again, already successful, but I had already went through D-Day with my wife and going through therapy. And I called my mother. I said, "Do you remember when you made me do that?" She said, "Do what?" I said, "Mom, remember?" She said, "I didn't do that." I said, "Mom, you did that." And she denied it. And then my sister came in and was like, "Why are you trying to break up the family? You trying to do all this stuff?" And I was like, "I didn't make this up." And she said, "Well, if it did happen, I was young and stupid." And and she just tried to excuse it and this thing, because it's.
See what I mean about it? When you talk about the gynocracy, particularly in Black America, there is really no space for, at least so far, for accountability. It's not that there couldn't be one, but there's really little incentive for them to have one, right? And notice how the sister jumped in to defend her mother. We see this all the time, where women support each other just at mention of a situation. They don't even have to fully understand it. They immediately jump to support one another in the dynamic. So his sister jumps in and condemns him, even though he's talking about this painful experience that he's had. And he's actually, and I credit him for being willing to do this, because holding your mother accountable is not the easiest thing in the world to do, especially when you've been socially conditioned to serve her and Black women by extension. It's not an easy thing to do for a Black son, even in adulthood, to hold their mothers accountable for poor and sometimes downright evil behavior. It's not the easiest thing to do. So I credit him for trying to do so, but she dismissed it almost like a 13-year-old, preteen. If it did happen, it's childish. That's a childish response, right? But she childishly dismissed him, and his own sister condemned him for even bringing it up. But I'm gonna let it finish. It only has a few seconds left.
Painful. It's too painful. No one wants to know they hurt their kids, but it happened. And it was part of me getting through every little bit.
Okay, that's where it ends. But notice how he's really still not able to accept, really the existence of a gynocracy. But more than that, he's not able to accept the fact that his mother did this and may not have really cared at all about what it did to him, because he said nobody wants to hurt their child. He's giving her that because he's having a hard time still, apparently, at least up to the recording of that interview, he's having a hard time accepting that his mother could do this and not give a damn, right? But this is what many Black men experience, various levels of disrespect. And this was just a mother-son dynamic. We could talk about this in terms of husband-wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, friends, associates, strangers that ever return something to a store and have to do. Don't let me get into that shit. But anyway, there's all kinds of relational dynamics between Black men and women where this kind of rampant disrespect, contempt for Black men is not discussed in the mainstream at all, not even in the Black mainstream. But there are so many men that have experienced it and are not able to speak on it and be taken seriously unless they're talking to other men who've experienced it. So when we talk about feminization and we start to see these white middle-class scholars, journalists, or whatnot starting to either dodge feminization altogether or talk about it from their vantage points, they don't really understand Black men's experiences with Black feminization, because it's tied to a misandry that we have not been able to call out, but we've started to nonetheless. And we're suffering the arrows and the bullets that come with calling that kind of thing out. But when you align Black women's behavior with a larger macro scale shift, right, to deferring to women, as we call feminization, you can kind of see how that alignment can further problematize life for Black men and boys. So we look at Brian McKnight as one example of Black feminization in terms of how his sons were really groomed to, see him as a monster in many respects from the beginning of the relationship with their mother. And then that doesn't even speak to the things that happened throughout the marriage. And then we go to Terry Crews and see, how his own mother and sister, I'm going to add her because of her, the way she jumped into the situation and the posture she had against him just at the mere mention of this traumatic thing, right? We can see how this kind of treatment of Black men can play out differently than it does, and why Scott misses the point that many Black men are making, because we have a different experience with feminization. But there's one other thing I want to mention about the sister when she jumped in and immediately condemned him. We can't imagine in society the opposite of that, which would be a father having violated his daughter. And when the daughter mentions it, her brother jumps in and silences her. How would that go over today? How would that be received? You're just trying to break up the family by saying dad touched you. Word. Right? But it's acceptable when it happens to men, because men are supposed to be quiet, shut up, take it, and don't say anything about it. And in many ways, whether he intends to or not, Scott Galloway is advocating for that. And the response from men is to walk away. Now, you can like it, you can not like it. I'm not giving it any value in the sense that I applaud it or I don't. I'm really pointing out that that's why it's happening. It's happening because feminization, as Scott frames it, it's women's uplift and it needs to be celebrated. Okay. That's your approach to it. But those who have had these kinds of experiences in their community for a while know that feminization has another side to it. And it tends to, it advocates for women's uplift at the expense of men and boys. And the contempt that many men and boys have experienced most of their lives within families, within institutions, at the job site, whatever, is so deep and widespread that men have decided to shut down to the degree that you now have to write articles and have news reports trying to figure out why the fuck it's happening. But you spent years telling men to shut up and be quiet, fall on their sword, and accept it. Act like it's not happening. How's that working? I heard one of the other reporters that was interviewing Scott in another interview say, well, you know, we do have to deal with this situation because it's affecting women and girls, and they're not able to find partners and relationships. So if anything, we got to do something for the boys just to do something for the girls. And I'm like, this is the fucking problem. Society's inability to see and understand male vulnerability and to acknowledge that something needs to be done about it because these are human beings. Society's inability to do that, especially amongst the left, who are supposed to be the humanists, right? They're supposed to be the ones that have empathy for people who have experienced something adverse. No empathy for men. LGBT, but other than that, no. Only empathy the masculine gets on the left is if a woman is being masculine. That's about as close as you get. But that's really why it's happening. So I've just shown you a couple of examples of why feminization is a problem for men. And these are just surface level examples, but still, men don't process it the same way because we don't have the same experience. We don't have the same experience as women experiencing feminization, and amongst men themselves, white, black, Asian, we don't all have the same experience with feminization either. There are some overlapping tropes that I think men could collaborate on if they so chose, and I would only advocate doing so on a case-by-case basis. But you can tell from Scott's approach to it, we have vastly different experiences, and some of that is influenced by class, some of that is influenced by past opportunities. Scott himself pointed out opportunities he had that many can't speak to along the lines of class and race. Hell, I got a doctorate and I didn't have the experiences that Scott had. So even amongst those of us who are parallel to men like Scott, there are vast differences. Right? But anyway, wanted to put that out there. Hopefully give y'all something to think about. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, what your experiences have been, what I've missed, what you think you need to add. Feel free to jump in the comment section and do so, because I think it's time. We have to do this. So appreciate y'all coming through, and I will holler at y'all soon. If you have something you want me to talk about, let me know. Because I'm not always clear on what moves me to engage, but this one did. So if you have something you want to add to that, let me know. But anyway, y'all have a good one. I'll let y'all soon. Peace. I am here to tell you, brothers, we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, unintelligent henchmen, valueless assassins, pro bono mercenaries, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, emotional tampons, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, and extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic, selfish, and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.